A world where everything and everyone is watched, and where you feel no connection to the people around you, living an alienated and lonely existence. This is the dystopian reality drawn by George Orwell in his masterpiece 1984. But chances are, it does sound menacingly familiar to you, as 1984 is scarier than any dumb horror movie. Because while reading it, we subconsciously acknowledge how real it can be, and how thin the walls between our society and this dystopia are, as the society we live in is just this far away from totalitarianism. And after rereading the book and watching the movie, I have analyzed the themes presented by Orwell and compared them to the world we are currently living in. But beware, because this video will shatter any illusions you might have about the liberal democracy we live in. And once you swallow that pill, there is no coming back. Love, freedom, peace. These basic human desires are nothing but a distant echo of the past in the world of 1984. In this timeline, the World War II wasn't followed by decades-long Cold War, but rather sometime in the mid-1950s, it escalated into a full-out nuclear war, with major cities destroyed by atomic bomb blasts. Soviet Union took over all of Europe, and the Western world unified under a single flag, forming a new country, Oceania. After this conflict was over, Oceania fell into a civil war between capitalism and socialism, with the latter being the successful one, eventually forming itself into one big powerful party called INCSOC. While the ideologies that succeeded in the other two major states of the world were Neo-Bolshevikism in Eurasia, the successor state of Soviet Union, and a bizarre-sounding ideology called Obliteration of the Self in the East Asia, which succeeded China. These three superpowers, now the sole geopolitical forces, exist in a perpetual state of warfare. This sustained conflict isn't driven by control of resources, ideological differences, or the desire to take the other's territory, but rather engineered to subdue their respective populations. The fires of this perpetual war serve as both a means of control and a distraction, diverting the attention of the masses away from the suffocating grip of their governments. And we see an example of it somewhere in the beginning of the book, as Winston, the main protagonist of the story, is present at the so-called 2 minutes hate gathering, where people are forced to watch a short clip of Goldstein, an ex-party member deemed as a traitor, exposing the truth to the people, that their freedom has been taken away. But the people assembled have none of it, instead screaming in rage and throwing things at the screen, their minds conditioned to deny anything outside of the worldview taught to them by the party. The scariest thing about it, as Winston says, is that it's impossible not to join in. Within 30 seconds, an ecstasy of fear, desire to kill, to torture, seemed to flow through people like an electric current, turning an individual, even against one's own will, into a screaming lunatic. Such an idea isn't a mere fiction. Fear and groupthink have been exploited throughout the history of mankind by authoritarian states in order to control their own populace. Adolf Hitler took over a country in crisis. People hungry and frustrated, filled with hate and anger directed towards those who have destroyed their once great empire. And the fact that such negative emotions can heighten susceptibility was proven by Ivan Pavlov, a Russian neurologist who during his experiments on dogs realized that a prolonged stress, exhaustion or negative stimuli made it easy to install new behavior patterns in the animal's mind. So together with his chief propagandist Joseph Goebbels, Hitler would famously assemble tens of thousands of these filled with anger people in vast halls and arenas where they no longer remained individuals with their own independent thinking, but rather as members of a crowd. Studies have shown that people congregated as such quickly lose their individual thinking, and their susceptibility is drastically increased. And Hitler, jointly with Goebbels, knew exactly what they were doing, filling their speeches with insults and hate, exploiting the resentment of German people. And once their negative emotions were sufficiently stirred, nothing could stop them to impose their will on them. Groupthink is intoxicating, just like alcohol, and under its influence, a man becomes simply a mindless animal capable of any immoral action. But Hitler or the fictional regime of 1984 didn't have the access to technology that the world today is exposed to. All of the phones we carry and the social media right inside of our pockets are nothing but the most sophisticated source of groupthink all past dictators could only ever dream of. You no longer have to assemble people in vast halls or arenas. Apps like Instagram or TikTok are literal factories of mindless groupthink. Posts done by influencers featuring perfect bodies and perfect lifestyles, making sure you never feel happy or confident about yourself. And when it comes to showing you something in regards to politics or world events, it will never provide you with a balanced perspective. It will bombard you with propaganda that incites you to fear and hate. If you are more left-leaning, you will see more posts showing, for example, how Donald Trump is an awful human being. If you are right-leaning, all you will see is the degeneracy of LGBT and how Antifa is causing trouble during riots, essentially leading to you dehumanizing the other side, never reaching any common ground or understanding between each other. Because discourse and intellectual understanding is not good for profit and it's not good for the control of the masses. Just take a look at the war in Ukraine. When it first started, you had millions of people going out on the streets in order to protest. Did any one of them know anything about the history of Ukraine and Russia? Did they know the other side of the story and the complicated nuances of it? No. All they knew is that Russia bad, Ukraine good. Because that's what their screens said and that's what was getting a lot of likes at the time. Completely ignoring the fact that, for example, the well-praised Zelensky isn't a saint either, having put in house arrest or imprisoned voices of opposition. Or that Ukraine has an extremist Nazi political party known for oppressing Ukrainian Russians. That's not something that the state wants you to know. It wants to rally you up for whatever cause it needs to and keep you distracted from the corruption and oppression that they themselves are responsible for. Now, going back to the book, INCSOC, the party ruling Oceania understood that in order to control people, it's not enough to simply change the way they see the world. They must also change the way they speak about the world. As Winston sits down in lunchroom, he ends up having a conversation with one of his co-workers who works on a new dictionary that shortens the vocabulary of English language. That's when we are introduced to the concept of NewSpeak, a new form of language created by INCSOC that strips English down to its bare essentials, removing thousands of words to the point where the party no longer needs to worry about the opposition, as any debate becomes impossible because people won't even know any words to describe things like rebellion or freedom. And it's happening in our own world, as simple things like children's books have their words altered to better suit the woke agenda. Famous works of Roald Dahl changed into more gender-neutral forms. For example, small men have become small people, and cloud men have been turned into cloud people. The words deemed as offensive, like fat, crazy, or ugly, have been either completely removed or replaced by more appropriate synonyms. Entire sections of children's most favorite books have been rewritten to eliminate any possibility of thought crime. It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of the words. But it doesn't just end with the children's books. Works of great minds like Adam Smith, William Shakespeare, Aldous Huxley, and George Orwell are deemed as possibly dangerous and shared by enemies of the state. But that's merely a tip of the iceberg compared to the terrifying effects social media have had on the language of our generation. Addicted to the stimulus of never-ending stream of content, it has become impossible for them to sit down and read a book. As a matter of fact, few people nowadays use their reading abilities to read anything besides subtitles on TikTok videos, which serve nothing but empty entertainment. Therefore, the language young people speak is progressively less sophisticated. It's become difficult for them to express and describe their opinions properly in well-structured sentences, contrary to the eloquence of even the simplest people from 100+ years ago. Just look at the language used in letters of simple soldiers from the times of Civil War to understand what I mean. The thing such corruption leads to is essentially limiting people's range of thinking, making it difficult to ever think outside of the box, to form opinions that stray away from the mainstream path, turning them into mindless cogs in a mass consumerist machine. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. As Winston is sitting in a lunchroom, a propaganda message starts playing, saying that the standard of living has gone up by 20% over the past year, and that there has been a demonstration full of people thanking Big Brother for raising the weekly chocolate ration to 20 grams. Even though Winston remembers that only yesterday the ration was announced to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that they could swallow that after only 24 hours? Yes, they swallowed it passionately, with a furious desire to vaporize anyone who should suggest that last week the ration had been 30 grams. With that, we are introduced to the concept of doublethink. The party's grip on information and minds of the people is so tight that they can make people believe in two contradictory beliefs. It's one of the founding ideas of INCSOC. As their main slogan famously goes, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. It's not sufficient that the individuals just comply and parrot the regime's beliefs, all while secretly holding their own views. They must genuinely believe in those two contradictory ideas. Party claims that it has liberated proles, meaning the working class of the people, from the clutches of evil capitalism. That's a fact. It also claims that proles are subhuman, worse than animals, and unworthy of life. That's also a fact, and nobody ever sees anything wrong with it. The party's information control gives it the power to shape reality according to its own desires. But it isn't something George Orwell came up with out of thin air. The concept of creating myths to shape a society's origin and order has been used throughout history by many ancient regimes, such as the Roman Empire. These myths would provide reasoning for societal structure and it shapes citizens' perspective of the world while also contradicting the reality of it all. For a more recent example, Soviet Union's political system was founded on the idea that in order to establish a true communist society where everyone is equal and there is no government, the so-called dictatorship of the proletariat needed to be enforced, giving power to a small group of people who essentially became the new elite, becoming even bigger monsters than the previously abolished monarchy. As time passed, the promises of decreased government control and increased equality became distant memories as the regime's power grew and the top elite lived luxuriously while the working class struggled to survive. Despite this, the promise of the opposite continued to be promoted to the people, and the loyal followers of the regime still believed that it would soon come true. But such manipulation isn't something exclusive to authoritarian regimes of the past. It's happening in the Western world today, right in front of our very eyes, where our version of Big Brother promotes the sugar-coated view of love and freedom for everyone, while simultaneously silencing anyone who remotely disagrees with their policies or has controversial opinions. We live in a society where the myth and fiction of our world revolve around freedom and equality. For example, the idea of gender equality has been shoved into our faces for decades by now. Yet what we see nowadays is essentially a world where men are progressively more lonely, alienated, deprived of intimacy, and find it difficult to find the recognition that women, so long as they are deprived of morals and ethics, can gain within moments after posting a video of themselves dancing provocatively on TikTok. And the top elite's identity revolves around nothing but pure virtue signaling and woke preaching. Take Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock, as an example, one of the biggest investment companies, who has established an entire system of ESG score, where companies are judged whether or not they are investable, based on their support for social and environmental causes, all while being the biggest investor in fossil fuels, the deforestation of Amazon forest, and the biggest weapon manufacturers in the world. Going back to the book, at one point Winston is interrupted by a knock on his door. Upon opening it, he finds his neighbor's wife requesting his help to fix the kitchen sink in her home. While he's busy repairing it, he hears her children savagely yelling at him, accusing him of being a thought criminal, traitor, and a Eurasian spy. A very serious accusation, one that could lead to him being vaporized by the secret police. After this incident, Winston goes on to reflect that over time, people like him or his colleagues will pass away or become vaporized by the state. And as they fade, so too will the truth. As INCSOC recognized, to create an army of blindly obedient followers, they must target not the older people who remember the times from before the revolutions, but the young ones, children, whose minds are like sponges, easily influenced by the system and culture around it. Orwell clearly took inspiration from totalitarian regimes of his time like Nazi Germany or Soviet Union, where entire groups like Hitler Youth or pioneers were created. Children there were taught only the agenda of the ruling ideology, and encouraged to snitch on their parents if any remote signs of ideological wrongthink was seen by them.
I'm an agent of Goldstein. My daughter found it out. Very proud of her.
In Soviet Union, the loyalty to the state was deemed as being more crucial than loyalty to one's own parents. But it's not like the education system in our society is any different. As a matter of fact, it has a history that dates back to Prussian Empire, when in the 18th century it got a hold of vast areas of what once used to be Poland. At that time, the empire needed to assimilate citizens of their once sworn enemies into their society. They chose to target not the adults, who were proud Polish people, but their children, who were taken away from their families into state-controlled schools and forced to adopt the ways of Prussia. By doing so, they successfully influenced the next generation to speak German and join the Prussian army. This method was so effective that later on Americans did the very same thing with the children of natives, and then during the massive industrialization to the massive amount of people living and fetching for themselves in vast areas of Wild West in order to increase the amount of factory workers. Through financial support of top billionaires like the Rothschild family, this education system became the norm, first across the whole nation of United States and then across the whole world. And what is this system if not the exact same one that brainwashed and indoctrinated children of Poles and Native Americans? Children are forced to spend their most creative years of their life sitting in prison-like classrooms, away from the outside world and their relatives, being taught not the values of the family, but the values of the state. And such education system is damaging, especially to boys, who are never taught about masculinity, testosterone, or how to use their natural aggression in a productive way. Taught to never stand up for themselves and always look up to state-controlled authority for guidance and protection. It's a flawed system that wasn't created there to help children utilize their talents and creativity to become individuals following their path, but rather to create a nation of obedient workers. Just think about it, from your own experience. How many of you watching have struggled with addictions, laziness, lack of discipline? You were never taught anything about workflow or productivity. Most of the time you spent at school wasn't an actual beneficial work. It was simply a time wastage. And after you finally got some free time outside of the classroom, what awaited you was not a call to work on your potential, but rather an avalanche of mindless entertainment. Netflix, junk food, TikTok, endless scroll. And once you got older, that conditioning made sure you never achieved your potential, never developed your talents, and just relied on the path provided by the state. The miserable 9-to-5 existence, to acquire just about enough money to get through the next month and be able to work more at a job you don't even care for. Our society doesn't need you as a man. Your testosterone, your strength, your masculinity, it needs consumers and workers who will push the corporate machine forward. Your desires, your goals, it's of no concern to them. A similar feeling of alienation and misery is shared by Winston as he begins to write with disgust in his secret diary about being forced to have sex with prostitutes to fulfill his sexual desire. Despite being 40 years old, he never experienced any intimacy, no love, no meaningful relationship, as the party has abolished the very institution of family and repressed the basic human desire to be loved and to love. The only love allowed is that towards Big Brother. In our real world, loneliness has been sewn into the very fabric of our civilization. Before, we lived surrounded by small communities we felt connection to. Family unit was a quintessential part of our lives, and it wasn't until recently that it all started to break apart and the amount of lonely people became to rise. Industrialization of society, as it expanded, drew an ever greater number of people into large cities. Today, 50% of total human population now resides in the cities, and this number is projected to grow to 70% by 2050. Yet life in such cities isn't just unnatural for human beings, it's hostile to them. Humans by nature aren't meant to live in huge communities like termites, bees or ants. We are closer to animals like wolves or elephants for that matter, meant to live in smaller packs. But city life has turned us more into insects, where we often don't know majority of the people we come across, with the towering glass buildings and massive crowds of people making us feel insignificant, where we are a mere embodiment of economic functions, and irresponsible seekers of entertainment in our free time. Forced into this kind of life, individuals start to feel lonely, and their existence ceases to have any point or meaning. And studies have shown that people living in the cities are more likely to develop mental health illnesses than people living outside of the cities. But instead of attacking the root of these illnesses, the system strives to make a profit off of it by sale of drugs like antidepressants, which provide you with a temporary remedy, numbing our instincts and making sure we tolerate social conditions which we would normally find intolerable intolerable. All of this misery is magnified by the soulless architecture of the cities we live in. Tall buildings made of cement and glass hovering endlessly over our heads as we make our way to our jobs. A stark contrast to the architecture of the past. Nowadays, the buildings around us were specifically designed to suck the soul out of us, leaving us with the overwhelming feelings of alienation and insignificance. Such a tactic was used under communist regimes as well, notably Roman dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, who famously destroyed cherished old buildings in the city center of Bucharest, including people's own houses and places of worship, and replaced them by monotonous, grey apartment buildings. And this with a very specific goal in his mind: to destroy people's souls. But our society doesn't just make people lonely, it actively thrives off of it, turning it into a source of endless profit, with entire products and industries being created to feed off of people's isolation from the outside world. The desire for love and intimacy is one of the main primal desires of humans, and with it being not fulfilled in natural healthy ways, corporations have found ways to create artificial replacements for it. Things like AI girlfriends. They keep your desire satisfied, all while at the same time being shallow with no value behind it, simply making sure you never fulfill your true potential and stay lonely, making the big corporations more money. And it's not just a thing common amongst some basement incels. 60% of men under age 30 are reported as single, and half of them don't even want to pursue any relationships at all. Millions of men are currently experiencing and living in a state of perpetual loneliness and meaninglessness, the same that Winston has experienced his whole life, until one day he notices a woman staring at him unexpectedly. Initially, he thinks she's a member of the thought police, and even considers killing her for a while. But as he walks by her again, she falls over, and after helping her stand up, she secretly hands him a note. Upon opening it, Winston sees 3 words that he has possibly never seen before in his life: I love you. This note fills him with a sudden sense of hope and a renewed will to live. And after exchanging a few notes between each other, they finally get to arrange a secret meeting outside of the city, in a forest area where there is no surveillance. Upon arrival in the scheduled place, the name of the woman turns out to be Julia. And after a brief conversation, Winston states,
I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone corrupt.
That statement is a direct act of defiance against the corrupted system that party has created, where the very concept of virtue has been twisted, manipulated, meaning that the idea of what's good and virtuous has been turned on its head, and what Winston calls corrupted are actually healthy and natural parts of human life that the party sees as dangerous to its existence, as any sort of enlightenment or prosperity would provide people with sufficient consciousness to question and defy the authority of Big Brother. The government doesn't try to help them with their individual development, they just want to exercise their power and therefore the ability to control the people to the utmost capability, making sure they completely swallow up party's ideology and become soulless parodies of human beings. Similar corruption of traditional values have occurred in our world over the past few decades. You see, people are no longer judged by their personality or strength of their character. Instead, the only thing valued is the superficial, with our whole existence only revolving around our bank accounts, cars, and amount of social media followers we have. Contrary to the golden ages of human history, Athenians, Roman Empire, Islamic civilization, and the Renaissance, where people valued art, religion. But the art of today is a countless, borderline explicit posts on Instagram, and our religion is greed and money. The celebrities we look up to are hollowed-out, vacuous individuals with their worth laying only in their image and material wealth. All of the modern rappers, reality show casts, and social media influencers. And because we worship and put them on a pedestal, all of that decadence spills over to the lower levels of society, with the same shallow, hedonistic lifestyle being followed by young men and women. And that's perhaps one of the biggest things Orwell missed out on in his book, as in his vision, totalitarian regime of Ingsoc controls people mainly through violence and threats, similar to what Nazi Germany and Soviet Union have done in the past. But another similar writer, Aldous Huxley, hypothesized that the tyrants of the future wouldn't rely on violence to subdue their people, but rather on pleasure and never-ending distractions. It has happened in history before, as the Roman aristocracy famously used gladiators gladiator fights in order to keep their populace entertained. Similarly, the Roman Catholic Church would use its corrupted version of Christianity to keep the uneducated masses away from enlightenment. However, never before in history have the opportunities for distraction and endless flow of pleasure been this high. As nowadays we are bombarded with shallow hedonism, and nowhere is it more visible than on social media like Instagram. Influencers posting pictures of their cars, their bodies, and whatever luxuries they possess, all while the average person scrolling through it sees it as the peak of what they want to achieve. Not family, not meaning, not eloquence, but rather a shallow hedonistic pursuit of wealth and pleasure. These once simple apps designed to connect people have been transformed into addictive monsters that can be just as all-consuming as drugs like cocaine or crack, with millions of dollars invested in research. These apps have been specifically engineered to exploit our desire for social interaction and provide us with a constant stream of dopamine hits, which keeps you sedated and comfortable while meaning of your life is being sucked away with each hour you spend mindlessly scrolling through a bunch of content that's of no benefit to you, while you also are distracted from the reality of the world around you, as you accept and embrace the never-ending chase after trends. Why would you want to do anything of value to change the circumstances of your life, when all of your desires are constantly being fulfilled with just a simple movement of your finger? Julia and Winston spend time together in a secret room above an antique shop. They know that sooner or later they'll be found and punished by the thought police. However, the desire to experience a semblance of normal life is just too strong. They enjoy the high-quality food that Julia stole from the party's supplies, spend evenings in each other's arms, and read subversive literature. Unfortunately, everything goes crumbling down as expected. A telescreen turns out to have been right behind the painting in their room, and the owner of the antique shop is revealed to be an informant. They have been watched and listened to all along from the very beginning. And as thought police burst into the room, they are forced to submit and are taken away to the re-education center. The world of 1984 is one of constant surveillance, where everyone is being watched and listened to at all times. French philosopher Michel Foucault gives us an excellent way of visualizing how this works in his book Discipline and Punish. He presents us with the idea of panopticon prison. This prison design involves placing prisoners in cells around a central watchtower, allowing guards in the tower to see all prisoners at any given time. Though guards cannot watch all prisoners simultaneously, the mere possibility of surveillance causes prisoners to behave as if they are under constant watch. Such prisons have proven to be effective in creating obedient inmates when implemented in real life. And we are currently living inside one such prison. Technological advancement has allowed the regimes of the world to spy on their citizens 24/7. Because of that technological difference, people living in liberal democracies today have less personal freedom and less privacy than those who lived under past monarchies and dictatorships, simply because they lacked the necessary technology to enforce their rulings on the whole population, being limited merely to the idea of secret police forces. We now take for granted that there are surveillance cameras everywhere, and an enormous information on pretty much anyone can be found within the databases of all major tech companies. And especially when it comes to apps like TikTok, which track every little swipe you do, every search you make, every keystroke.
This is from TikTok's privacy policy.
All right.
It said, we collect certain information about the device you use to access the platform, such as your IP address, app and file names and types, keystroke patterns or rhythms. So they're monitoring your keystrokes, which means they know every fucking thing you type.
Wow.
That's what you're agreeing to when you download and start using TikTok.
Do you think they did that? They created TikTok just on purpose to have all that?
100%.
All of that information combined with the use of powerful algorithms makes the physical coercion this much powerful, as regimes of today don't need to use violence to impose their will. We willingly accept it as simply a part of digital life. And the scariest thing about it is that there's simply no escape from it. In order to fit into the society, you must possess some kind of at least minimal social media presence, eventually leading to your private life being recorded into databases. Even as I was typing a script for this video on my Google Documents account, every single button I hit on my keyboard, every letter was recorded by Google's database. And you, as you are watching this video, an algorithm is recording it in order to provide you with similar content in the future. And just like Winston is eventually caught by a telescreen hidden behind a painting in his hideout, even if you throw away your phone in act of desperation, you will still be tracked by street cameras or even listened to through phones of people around you. The book ends with Winston being thrown into the underground cells of the Ministry of Love. The Ministry of Ingsoc that's responsible for enforcing love towards Big Brother on the thought criminals like Winston. For what it seems like months, he's brutally tortured with a machine that sends powerful electric waves through his body. The goal of this torture isn't, however, to force you to merely say that you love Big Brother, but to make you genuinely love him with all of your heart.
We make him one of ourselves before we kill him. We make his brain perfect before we blow it out. And then, when there is nothing left but sorrow and love of Big Brother, we shall lift you clean out of history. We shall turn you into gas and pour you into the stratosphere.
But even after experiencing all of this pain, Winston still manages to hold on to his individuality, and so he's sent to room 101, where people are broken by being forced to stand face to face with their biggest nightmares, which for Winston is the fear of rats, as he has had traumatic experiences in the past with these animals. He has a cage with a rat put right in front of his face. After being threatened with the opening of the cage, Winston finally breaks and begs that the same thing instead be done to Julia, the woman he loves. With that, his mind is finally broken and any individuality left in him is destroyed. As he's allowed to re-enter the outside world, he meets Julia again. But the passion and love they had for each other is now a hollow husk of what it once was. The broadcast on the telescreen heralds a triumph over Eurasian forces, and the crowd's overwhelming joy raises a cheer from Winston as well.
Wonderful news.
Yet this cheer isn't his own. It's the manifestation of indoctrination, a chorus of loyalty he cannot escape. And soon afterward, he's sent back to Ministry of Love, this time with his sins forgiven and his soul purified, walking with an armed guard at his back and the long-hoped-for bullet entering his brain. His last thoughts being that of love towards Big Brother. Even in death, there was no escape.